All right. I had another song lined up to play. Make sure everything's working fine. Yep. Looks good so far. I had another song lined up to play, but I got started late, so I'm just gonna go ahead and skip that. And I'm ready to get going. So let's get going. Uh, um. Right. Okay. I should have made a list of all the stuff that I wanted to talk about, but I didn't. So hopefully I remember the things that I wanted to all talk about today. Um because it's kind of a lot. I'm still putting a pin in the conversation on perfectionism. I think for now. I'm just not quite ready yet to have a conversation about that yet. Well, I should say hi to everybody. Hi, Jane. Welcome in. Thank you for being here. It's good to see you. Thank you for the reminders. Welcome in, Kayamatara, Tenekoa. I hope you're doing well. You're having a good one. The leftist perfectionism. So there's an aspect of leftist perfectionism. I want to have a long conversation about this, and kind of the overarching idea is gonna be about quote unquote policing. Thanks, Kat. Then policing as in how we think about deviance, what that means in leftist spaces, and how we deal with deviance from what we think is productive, or deviance from what we think is leftism, or deviance from what we think is the preferred way for us to move forward, those kinds of ideas. And I really haven't put all of those ideas together yet in a way that I think is reasonable for us to start unpacking them yet. But that's still on the back burner, among with all of the other things on the back burner. I've got several things on the back burner. But speaking of, one of those things has kind of gotten moved a little bit forward. I don't know if I'd mentioned this before, but I am reading through this work, Hannah Arendt, Between Past and Future. It is fantastic. I finished reading the first chapter. I got to the end of the first chapter and reread the first chapter. I've read now the second, third, and seventh. The first, second, third, and seventh chapter of this book. If I'm correct that Truth in Politics is the other, there's an essay that I think that I've read. Anyway, it's fantastic work, and I'm getting through it, and I'm going to be talking about it a lot, and I'm going to be really excited to this is a project for me and my academic career, in that I don't have anything reasonably published. My only quote-unquote publications are in presentations that I've given at conferences, and that's not really... I would like to have more stuff on my CV, right? And so one of the things that I'm plan to start doing is building expositions, and I want them to start with Hannah Arendt because she's one of my favorite philosophers. I think she's extremely relevant for our times and what we're going through. And I have so much to say about that. There's so much in this first chapter that I just finished reading. But I want to digest it and think about it for a while before I go just saying stuff about it half cocked. And part of the reason is because I've already started working on the exposition, and almost everything that I've written so far is at best inaccurate. At very best, grossly not even close to the mark for what Hannah Arendt means and what her ideas are trying to get toward. I've mostly just been making notes to myself about things, and those notes, as I go back and reread them, I'm like, I don't think this is probably not, maybe I'm making some assumptions here. I certainly am incorrect about this. So there's a whole lot of stuff that I want to go back and make sure that I'm getting before I start talking about it. But on another kind of related note, but in a completely different direction, I did get to read Kayamatara's most recent essay that they wrote on Substack. Ghosts Are Real, You're Holding One. It is wonderful. Please go check it out, everyone. Let me go grab the link. I think this is the right link for it. Does this link work for everyone? Anyways, that link should work. And I want to tie some of those things in from that article with one of your previous articles. I want to talk about some identity stuff with regards to power. And then I want to make a note about a few other things that I want to talk about before we get into talking about, or before we finish the Anarch video on anarchism. We are on the sixth video of the summary lectures, how do horizontal organizations function. That one's only 30 minutes. Should be pretty easy for us, I think. With as much groundwork as we've done and as much conversations as we've had up till now, I think that we can get through it pretty quickly without much ado. There's not going to be much for me to explain that hasn't been thoroughly explained, I think. I haven't seen the video, but that's my assumption. But before we get to the Anarch video, there's a few things that I want to say about this work from Kayamatara, mostly to Kayamatara because they're here, and there's an interesting relationship between this work that you let me get the other view. So that one's and the other one. Not why the right aren't political. That's what the other one was titled. Something about the right and not being political. So in that one, I wish I had it pulled up. I've got a link for it. Good. We'll show this word off because that's in the article, and that's the definition. That's helpful for anybody that's going to be checking out the article by Kayamatara. Then this is going to be helpful reference too. Let me pull up this. Right. So there's an interesting relationship that I see. And I'm not sure if you see, or if maybe it's something that's obvious to you, and so you haven't even thought to point it out. But there's this what is it called? So it's two different concepts, and those two different concepts are classically, philosophically considered two completely different things. They're philosophical things that have been talked about that are considered different things. I see them in the way that you're talking about them as those two things being kind of the same thing. And I would like to get your input on it. Because you're talking about, here you're talking about commodity fetishism in a lot of ways, actually. If the conversation that we had last time about commodity fetishism is leaving some of you wanting, this would be a great way to fill in those gaps. Also, I'll probably fill in some of those gaps today. I imagine it'll come up. If not, then I'll spend a lot of time talking about it on Friday's stream, I would imagine. But so we're talking about the alienation of that which we participate in. So what you're talking about here, you're talking about alienation in that we labor and we consume, and you are drawing attention to the commodity fetishism idea where we consume and we don't understand the relationship between the thing that we are consuming, our consumption, and how that thing came to be the product of labor, right? That's product fetishism, is that we consume the products and we use our consumption to navigate the world in a lot of very important ways, right? We consume to buy groceries, and we consume to pay our energy so that we can heat our homes. We consume in all of these ways with no understanding of where the labor came from for those things, right? There's this alienation that you're talking about. Yes, it did. I am having some technical difficulties. No, I think I pushed the wrong button. Probably. Thank you for letting me know. Yes, there it is. I pushed the wrong button somewhere. Thank you. So with that idea of idea of alienation, hold in your head. Now let's recall from this other article, "The Right Can't Be Political," this relationship. Oh, I'm going to get to know these really, really well soon. It's where you're talking about the idea of proletariat. When the proletariat becomes an identity that is a cultural identity, when proletariat becomes an identity that is a cultural identity, that identity is automatically, necessarily divorced from the actual laborer who is the proletariat. And you're drawing attention to it by the sugar cube. Yeah, here we go. Right. Take the worker. When the revolutionary proletariat claims to represent everyone equally and not just the worker. So when the proletariat as an identity leaves, right, becomes something apart from the actual laborer, right, that idea is already an idea divorced, necessarily, fundamentally is divorced in this very important way. And I believe that these that these different kinds of alienation, right, the fetish commodity alienation and the worker proletariat from their identity, I think that these are kind of the same thing. I haven't figured out how they're kind of the same thing. It just, to me, it seems like they are. In like I could sit down and write something out to that effect, but I just read your essay this morning, and so wanted to throw that out there. These are separate ideas, but I think that it's actually the same thing. The way that you're talking about, because there's another element of this too that I think that I feel is very obvious, but it's not explicitly drawn out. And that is that how you refer to spirit, the unspirited, this one, yeah, and the ideological representations of the inspirited categories it's its own kind of cultural, emergent cultural power. And the kind of what I'm seeing is that there is some kind of cultural power, and that cultural power pretends that, I don't think that's the right word, but the cultural power maybe believes itself to represent certain ideas about working class and about revolution and about proletariat. There's this cultural identity that I think is part of the difficulty that we're having on the left in general, of getting people to realize that they have to be based. And by that I mean that it's not just about sitting online and talking about the theory and talking the talk. It's about the praxis. But it can't be, right? The ideological conception of leftism is always abstract. It's always it's always this that's the other thing that I wanted to bring up. It's an identity that we don't get to have. It's an identity that we participate in. And this is a particular kind of language that I'm using here that's actually Platonic. If you're not familiar with Plato and the way that they talk about the realm of perfect ideals, there's Plato argues that there's the world of concepts where the perfect forms exist. And there is, for example, a perfect form of humanity. But we are not humanity, right? I am not human in that I get to define that thing and am defined by that thing. I participate in humanity, right? Things that are white are not the definition of what is white. Things that are white participate in that colorness, right? This idea of categories and this idea of participation, and participation in this, in a kind of identity in this way, is relational, right? As humans, we are somewhat defined by this idea of human, but also our actions determine what that category is and what that category means. So it's not it's not a one directional kind of, it's a reciprocal relationship of participation. And I think that ideology is not necessarily bad. We'll actually talk a bit about that too, Jane. When I think the idea that I'm getting to is that there's an alienation that exists naturally and probably necessarily between leftism, that is, people doing the things of prefiguration to make a better world, leftism, as opposed to the idea of the identity of leftism that many people participate in, right? And these are both different kinds of participation. Doing the thing would be participating, but also the ideology is a kind of participating, but this is it's the empty, flaccid kind, in that I like this sports team and I'm participating in the sports. So when they win, I win, right? The empty kind of meaningless. Anybody who's a sports fan, I'm just offending, but but it's a different kind of participation. Being on the sports team versus I like this team and celebrate when they win, right? Those are completely different kinds of participation. And I'm not sure where else to go else from there, but I saw that there was a relationship that tied these two essays together in a very concrete way that I thought was worth pointing out. And I think that there's some advantage to drawing out in greater detail this this idea. Actually, let me just go back because that'll be simple. That Tanihua. I think that there's a lot of versatility in how this idea has been used historically, first off. But before my Western academic brain tries to co-opt it, right? Let me first acknowledge that it's got a long-standing history that exists that's already deep and rich. But I think that there are ways that we can use these concepts that are already established to better elucidate some of the more complex ideas that philosophy are grappling with, to make sense of some of these ideas. Because I believe that there is a kind of embodiment that certain powers take up, right? When we think about Americanism, and Uncle Sam being a kind of visage, that what's the word? A facade, a representation, incarnate idea of what this feeling and identity is, right? And that there's when we think about that concept from Americanism transforming into something that we can attribute anthropomorphic characterization to, I think is helpful and valuable for a lot of things. And I think that this is true or I think that this kind of transition and relationship can be true for lots of other concepts that we are struggling to grapple with. I feel this feels related to Judith Butler's gender performance. Yes. in so many direct ways. It's yes, in that right, womanhood is something that you participate. I might have actually talked about this, Jane. Womanhood is something that you participate in, and that neither defines you totally, nor do you have the power to define it totally. But there is a defining thing going on there. There is a relationship there that by your participation in it, you are defined in some way by that cultural idea. But with your expression and your livingness of that, you also define it. You don't get to be the sole author of it, but you are irrefutably an author of it. So absolutely. And it's well, see, and that's my first inclination, Jane, was to say yes, that's right, but not entirely, not entirely. This is there's a very important relationship going on here, that you should not sell yourself short in. It is not the case that you are simply defining woman for yourself and no one else. By your living and your expressions, you are a living embodiment that other people see. And when other people see you doing the thing, they are affected by it. You shape their idea of womanhood by you being one and being yourself authentically and doing your own thing. So to some degree, yes, but also to some degree, no. That there is a profound relationship going on there that that is reciprocal and constant. But there was something else that you So yes, according to Plato, Jane, you are not a woman, you participate in womanhood. And there's a little bit of semantics here, because Plato also argued that nothing in the real material world was itself concretely real. Because a little bit of background, the pre-Socratics had gone through this idea of, well, there is no matter, or everything is matter, and they were trying to figure out what matter was, what atoms were. Actually, all of atomistic theory predates Socrates. And the definition that Plato comes to adopt is one that we get from Heraclitus about the world. I think it's Heraclitus. I probably should have thought about that before I just spouted it out. But I believe it is. And it's that the world is entirely in flux. That nothing is, right? This is a pre-Socratic, pre-Socratic idea. Heraclitus has the idea that everything that is isn't. It's a very profound metaphysical argument that there is nothing that actually is. Everything is always in a state of becoming. And this is the idea that Plato is kind of operating under, that there exists nothing that simply is. Everything is the product of some thing, right? The necessary chain of events that has caused this was preceded by necessary events that happened before it. So what is some kind of function or product of what this has been through in its past, and what it is in the process of becoming. This rock that just sits here was once part of a mountain or was once from a quarry and is now going to be shaped into a tabletop, right? And none of these things are permanent. None of these things are the thing that it is. There are things that piece of stone is just constantly in transition from what it was to what it will become. They didn't have the concept of emergence. No, they did not have the concept of emergence. They assumed that matter was and that nothing could be created or destroyed. It's interesting that a lot of the things that we came to understand as scientifically true, that matter cannot be neither created nor destroyed, were things that were understood by many ancient Greek philosophers, right? That concept that from nothing comes nothing is a really old ancient concept, and so no, they rejected. I'm trying to go through most of the pre-Socratics and most of the Socratics. Most of those that we would consider in ancient philosophy are all going to argue that emergence isn't a real thing, doesn't actually exist, or didn't believe in that kind of idea. Yeah, that's yeah, good, and that's good language for us to think about it too. That they would have not had the concept of emergence. Yes, this is where we get an infinite regression. And which is why philosophy thought that those the ideas of the pre-Socratics were so unfulfilling, unsatisfying, because it does seem like new things do come into existence. Emergence is something which clearly exists in the universe, not just in the world of human understanding. And that's, I think, an important distinction to make too, because for a lot of philosophy, many of the insights or advances or philosophical breakthroughs, however we want to think about those, might not have been new emergent ideas at all, rather reconstructed old ideas to fit a different understanding. And this is something that Hegel played with an awful lot in his early writing, was trying to understand, what is it? Are there natural properties about the world that function this way, or is it simply the case that the human brain goes through a bunch of mental gymnastics to trick itself into thinking that it's coming up with a new emergent idea, but it's not new at all. It's something that's just a reordering of old ideas to fit a new understanding of the world, which is now incompatible with some previously held conception. But in Hegel is, did I say Hegel? I meant to say Heidegger there. Both do the thing, but I meant to say Heidegger. Heidegger will come to believe that we do have some amount of free will, that it is not the case that we are stuck in this loop where we are merely fooling ourselves into thinking that we are creating something new. Heidegger is going to give us some kind of ideas about how brand new things can come to exist. And that's that quote that I've given you from Hannah Arendt's On the Human Condition, that I think does a really good job of explaining away determinism, and that you have some kind of power as a unique individual to change the world in ways which will make the world a different place than it was yesterday. thereby contradicting the strict determinist philosophical framework. It comes from Heidegger, right? Hannah Arendt got that idea from Heidegger. Cool. So, that's some of what I wanted to talk about. Here's another thing. This came out a few months ago, 6 months ago. Crash Course Philosophy, or Crash Course, the channel, has come up with a Native American history series, which is 26 episodes long, I want to say. And I don't know much about Che Jim. This is Che Jim does the first one. Let me go to a picture of Che Jim. This is Che Jim. He narrates the first one, and I saw that Lily Gladstone does some of the other ones. That's a name I'm familiar with. I know Lily Gladstone as being very knowledgeable and authentic. And Che Jim seems to be pretty cool too so far. I watched this first episode. It was really good. What brought me here was I was looking up a video on LandBack, which maybe I'll share that too, in the spirit of the colonizer holiday going on this week. So that's for this video, which is going to take you to the first episode of the Crash Course Native American History, which I thought was pretty good. I think that they do a pretty good job of not making a monolith out of indigenous peoples and explaining the nuances and the complications therein. Let's look up. Yeah, this is the LandBack episode. I watched.
How can Native people reclaim their stolen land?
Which I also thought was really good. So check it out, like, subscribe to the channel, and share it. I will be sharing this, especially if because I would like to see if they've got. I haven't had a chance to see if they have something that's specifically about Thanksgiving, because that would be something that I would share that everywhere. If I could ruin people's colonizer holiday, that would be fantastic. So this is something I stumbled across. I figured you all would appreciate it and like it, so I'm sharing that. Before we get to the video, I'm about to get there, Jane. The last thing that I want to share is here. Let me refresh this. So let me preface this a little bit. First, I have not followed Britt Hartley. I don't know anything about their politics or them as a content creator. Just wanted to preface that. I have, however, watched this video, and I think this video is pretty fantastic, and it touches on a lot of the ideas that I would like to talk about in the next few weeks. But Britt is talking about them in ways that I won't be talking about them. They are going to take a somewhat psychological perspective, and they are going to include a more thorough philosophical treatment for some of the concepts than I usually give. It's one of the reasons why I really like this video, is because if you are interested in philosophical nihilism, then I highly recommend that you check out this video, because Britt Hartley does a really good job of talking about what philosophical nihilism is, contrasting it with this idea of social nihilism and talking about the definition that the FBI has cooked up that Britt doesn't think works very well. I think I'm going to agree with Britt on that. That think that the FBI has either, right? It's either one of two things. The FBI has completely whiffed because they don't understand what they're doing, or they don't understand the what's going on, or they are doing exactly what they are supposed to by coming up with words and terms and muddying the waters in ways that is going to make it more difficult for the rest of us to do stuff. Which like it's one of these two. Either the FBI has whiffed and they are inept, or it is the case that the FBI's figured out that they can just fuck with our language a little bit harder and make things more difficult for us to figure out how to navigate the world. Yeah, absolutely. I would say that you are a philosophical nihilist in all of the important ways. I am also a philosophical nihilist in many of the same ways, and I think that you and I have differences. But those differences are not really that important. I'm not a hardwired philosophical nihilist, but I do tend towards that direction. So yeah, it's a really good video. Please check it out because we will be talking about it in the next coming weeks. Or these ideas will be background ideas in the conversations that we are going to be having over the next few weeks. Good. So I think that's all the stuff out of the way that I wanted to talk about. You said a second ago, there we go, on the 5th in the series. I think that we watched the 5th in the series, Jane. That's the Revolutionary Roadmap that we just watched last week. I think that we are on the 6th. It's entirely possible that I would have watched it without you all, but I really doubt that. First off, I generally remember when I watch videos. Not always. I mentioned how I started watching the Zoe Baker one on prefiguration and immediately realized I've already watched this video. So sometimes I don't remember watching the videos. But I think this is the one that we're on.
Hey everyone, Anarch here, and this is another episode of Anarch Abridged. In this episode, I'm going to be continuing this lecture series I've been doing where I summarize my longer video essays into a more digestible format. And the topic of today's video is going to be a summary of part 4 of A Modern Anarchism, titled Organization. This video is as of yet unreleased. However, the script is basically finished, so I figure I can create this part of the lecture series ahead of time, and as a bonus, it's kind of a sneak preview for some of you who are here for the video essays about what the sorts of topics are going to be of that next video essay. So if you're interested in learning about organization from an anarchist perspective, utilizing things like systems theory and cybernetics, then you should stick around because that's going to be the topic of today's video.
Welcome in, Matt. Anarchism 8, the Echo. No, the Ocho. The Ocho. We did not watch the 5th video on stream. Okay. I believe you, Jane. I'm not gonna, I mean...
Hey, everyone. Anarch here.
Yeah, I don't remember that shirt, so... okay, cool. I don't know why it says that I've seen the video. It's playing, like, it's got the red bar down here so that I've seen it, but I must have played it at some time and just, not realized. All right, so let's get this one. Thank you, Jane. I really appreciate you triple checking, and then get with me on that. You're awesome. You're amazing, and thank you.
And this is another episode of Anarch Abridged. This is part of a sort of lecture series, or a series of summaries, you might say, where I go over several of my video essays from the channel, including essays such as A Modern Anarchism, Power, Constructing the Revolution, and today's video is going to focus on A Modern Anarchism Part 3, titled Revolution. So that video covers a lot more than I'm going to be getting into here in this video. However, I just want to focus in on one part of A Modern Anarchism Part 3, and that is what I call the Revolutionary Roadmap. Now, it should be understood that historically, a lot of theorists have tried to avoid creating just such a revolutionary roadmap because they think it's too prescriptive. They're afraid of laying out a series of presuppositions which, when the material conditions come about, they're not going to take place. They're going to be different, and therefore all of our presuppositions will not apply to the circumstances that arise. However, now that we've seen the revolutionary outcomes of the 1800s, 1900s, and even the beginning of the 2000s, I think we can start to derive some rules of thumb about how horizontal revolutionary activity actually takes place.
I was just about to say that on the last video, I wanted to say, maybe it was the one before that, I started talking about the idea of our identity by negation. Oh, heck, I think I might be thinking about a class. Yep. I'm thinking about a conversation I had in the classroom with my students. But the same idea applies here. I think that we have talked about the idea of identity by paradoxical negation before, and if not, then I'll just take a moment. So, in the realm of epistemology, there are things that we don't know, and that is distinct often from that which we cannot know, that which cannot be known. But with regard to this category of that which cannot be known, even though we cannot have the truth value of certain kinds of things, that doesn't mean that we can't know nothing about that thing. An example that is often used is the idea of God. Whatever it is that you think or whoever thinks God is, if you are trying to define the idea of God, if you put G-O-D and then an equal sign, whatever you put on the other side of that equal sign will be insufficient, will not be a definition which is going to equal sign be that thing, be that concept, be as full and infinite and all everything that we ascribe with that idea. But there are things that we can exclude from possibility. Right? God isn't, right? Well, I mean, God isn't. Anyways, God doesn't exist. But if we wanted to know things about some hypothetical God, right? If we imagined that some God existed, and if we wanted to know characteristics about that God, what we could do is go through this process of negation. Well, it can't be this, and it can't be that, and it couldn't be this because this would form some kind of paradoxical idea with what we think that this thing is supposed to be. You can use the idea of paradoxical negation. Yes, it is. Yes, it is deductive reasoning, but it's like five-head deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning is typically only like it's very two-dimensional. It's not very five-head. But identity by paradoxical negation is deductive reasoning. Absolutely correct. But we're deductively excluding whole categories instead of identifying categories and particulars that fit within those categories, which is typically what deduction does. Instead of identifying particulars and categories, we exclude whole categories of possibility. And by excluding whole categories of possibility, we get a little pocket of that which could possibly be the truth about this thing, right? We can come to know what it is better by understanding that which it could not possibly be. Right. Actually, the human equals featherless biped is a really good example of this, right? In that Aristotle thought that it was a good deductive category. And then Anaxagoras plucked a chicken and brought it before Aristotle and shook it in his face and, here's your human, right? To give a counterexample to prove that the deductive reasoning that Aristotle had used was incorrect, had to have been flawed. And Anaxagoras does this by demonstrating that there is this whole other category that needs to be excluded that Aristotle hadn't excluded, right? And that's exactly yeah. Jay, let me attach feathers to myself and walk on my hands. That's good. But yeah, so I think that's probably not where Anarch is going. But I think that the idea that we can't have a prefigurative plan, I think is a foolish idea. That is informed by this idea that we can't know the necessary conditions that we will have in the future. And that's fine. We don't need to know the conditions. What we need to establish are thresholds, reasonable points past which it's time or we can no longer, right? That's what we need to establish, is ballpark areas that we know are cut off from those excluded categories, right? What I mean by this is we know that there are things that are akin to fascism or devolve into fascism. There are certain kinds of social organization that are very compatible with fascism, and we should exclude those whole categories, right? That we can know things about what we should do because we shouldn't do those. We shouldn't do any of those things if they're going to be related to fascism or be compatible with fascism. We can exclude those whole categories. Right. Yes, absolutely, Jane. Let me move me out the way so I can highlight that. Yes. Also, we cannot ad hoc completely. And this is one of the main points that they were talking about in the last video, is that when it comes time to do the doing, we need to already be ready to do the doing. Not, okay, now it's time to act, let's figure out what we're gonna know. It's past the time for figuring out. When it's time to act, we need to act. And we need to know what we are going to do. We need to have some of the planning worked out in advance. Absolutely, Jan.
And so you can kind of see this revolutionary roadmap as being a sort of map of what the horizontal revolutionary outcomes have been in a variety of circumstances, trying to generalize those circumstances as best as possible to understand what commonalities and differences they have between each other. So we'll just jump straight into it. Let's take a look at that revolutionary roadmap. So here is the revolutionary roadmap. And you'll see that it's separated up into a bunch of squares with symbols inside of them. Each of these squares are what I'm calling a frame. And in each frame, certain conditions prevail. So let's zoom in on the very first of these. So in these illustrations, the triangle is a symbolic representation of hierarchical power. And the circle is a symbolic representation of horizontal power. Where a circle is inside of a triangle, then, it is a horizontal power structure trying to arise within a hierarchical power structure. The first frame, the one I have titled A1 here, is what I call chirarchical stasis. So I haven't gotten into the meaning of this word chirarchy within this series of videos. However, just understand that chirarchy is the unified structure of all of the hierarchical power structures of a society sort of combined together, understood as one big machine where all of the pieces prop up all of the other pieces.
The idea of intersectional oppression, the logical conclusion of that is chirarchy. So when we look at patriarchy and racism and classism and the other kinds of isms that don't just form hierarchies, right? Because we are talking about the establishment of unjust hierarchies, but these are hierarchies which recreate themselves automatically with the ways that people live through those hierarchies. So that's what the idea of chirarchy is about the intersections of oppression that people face and the ways that those intersections of oppression are the product of humans' actions and activities, not just it's not just faceless systems. It is the fact that racism and sexism and classism are systems of hierarchy. But those systems of hierarchy are maintained by individuals who are doing the work every day of maintaining those hierarchies through what's called reality enforcement. Statist, white supremacist, patriarchal, says heteronormativity, yes, and also capitalism, right? It's all of the things. If we think about the monster of oppression, the monster of oppression has all of these different heads, like a hydra, and all of those heads have one single body, and that one single body is chirarchy.
So in this first diagram, what we see is just a triangle. And that's because what I'm attempting to represent here are the conditions where hierarchical power just has complete control, that it has destroyed all of the horizontal power structures within society. Now, of course, many people would probably mention that you can never really eliminate all horizontal power structures in a society, and that's true, but here what I'm attempting to indicate is that they don't have any power. They don't have any institutional power. They don't have any social power. At best, they only act to prop up all of the contradictions of the hierarchical power structure as it exists. One of the examples that comes to mind would be like the 80s and 90s in the United States, where there was essentially no horizontal power structures that had any real strength in American culture. And instead, hierarchical power really just had control over everything. It was the absolute default in society. So This chiral stasis is something that doesn't generally last very long. It usually collapses into one of these later frames in time. However, it could theoretically last for a very long time. For example, many feudal and monarchic societies lasted within chiral stasis for an extremely extended period of time and were only then subverted by things like guilds or peasants' rebellions. Ultimately, the thing to understand about this frame is just that hierarchical power structures wish to return to this frame in all the other frames we're going to be inspecting, because this is the frame where revolutionary activity is non-existent and the system essentially has an absolute stranglehold on everything in society.
I think that's a good spot to pause that. And I think this idea is tracking for everybody, right? The Anarch's beginning premise, it seems like they must have gotten some feedback on this, and somebody must have beat him up pretty hard about this. It seems to me like this distinction is really very easy, and doesn't need quite as much explanation as he's putting into it, right? If nothing else, we understand the fundamental difference from a society ruled by hierarchy to a society which is ruled by hierarchy but has powerful horizontal structures within those hierarchies undermining them. Like, we understand the difference between those two states of affairs, and that's, I think, the only thing that's being examined in the transition from A1 to A2. If that's unclear to anybody, just let me know, and we'll belabor it. But I wanted to read this, slightly related to either my next article or the one after it. One is liberalism is the alt-right pipeline. Yep. And the other is you have laziness backwards, arguing that doing nothing is good for revolutionaries and revolutionary analysis far more than, say, a vanguard party. I'll have to have more understanding about what you mean by doing nothing, but vanguardism is generally just not good practice anyway, so I'll probably just flatly agree with that.
So if you are in a society that is in chiral stasis, what should you do? Well, what you should do is begin creating horizontal power structures. And this is assuming, of course, that your chiral stasis is not so militantly suppressive that it will just destroy whatever the horizontal power structures you create are. However, even under those occasions, you can usually fly under the radar, even in chiral stasis, and you can create all kinds of things which do not appear revolutionary at their base, but indeed can build up to revolutionary bodies as you proceed. As you begin to build these horizontal power structures, and especially as they start to see some proliferation within your hierarchical society, then you will actually be exiting this frame, and we will analyze those conditions in a moment. However, I will also just make a few notes that if you're in an incredibly suppressive society, you probably want to do things like creating mutual aid organizations or unions or workers' councils. I'm not going to tell you precisely how to build these horizontal power structures within your conditions. I'm just going to note that you don't need these bodies to be out and out, openly militant anarchist bodies. It's usually more useful, in fact, to create bodies which are just there for consciousness raising and have a broader, more libertarian socialist thrust, or even more vague than that, you might just say you are a horizontalist organization. And I should make note
something actually that I saw on that LandBack video that I shared earlier, that something that doesn't get talked about enough is that sometimes holding space is an incredibly revolutionary act, and that's something that can be done under the radar and can be done in all kinds of horizontal ways under the radar that does directly undermine the system. As a quick aside, more of an observant act of doing nothing rather than, more of an observant act of doing nothing rather than an apathetic one. Probably like Wu Wei, if you're familiar with that term. It's Hindu term, or yeah, which has to do with effortless effort. Taoism, not Hinduism, excuse me. It's a Taoist term. Wu Wei is a Taoist term which means effortless effort. So it's not that you're not doing anything. It's that what you're doing isn't antagonistic to your place in the universe, into where you are and what you're supposed to be doing, right? Because there is a supposed to be that you are supposed to be doing, that's unique to you. For everyone in this philosophy, right? In Taoism, everyone has a purpose, and that purpose is unique for everyone. When you're not doing your purpose, you are fighting against the will of the universe, or fighting against the fates, or whatever, however we want to imagine that. But Wu Wei is an effortless effort where we are doing, but what we are doing is not resisting. And it's not. I don't think that those terms are the same, right? But I think there's similarities kind of there, that are in the ballpark. Being inoffensive, right? Yes, I gotcha. Yes, and that's the problem with vanguardism, is it is antagonistic to the system in ways that are going to basically beg the system to deal with it. Whereas I think that what you're talking about is more of a quiet, receptive. There's a diligence there, to the not doing. Right? There's a diligence to the not doing. I hope that language translates well. Yeah, good. Yeah.
Before I move on to the next frame, that one of these horizontal power structures that can fly under the radar of hierarchical power structures a lot of the time is the reading group. I think it's because hierarchical power structures don't usually see the reading group as being much of a threat. However, it can be a great place to rally everyone together under a common ideology and to begin a radical education together. But moving on to the next frame, the frame I have labeled here as A2 is actually what I call catalysis. So in catalysis, those horizontal power structures we discussed are actually beginning to form. This is what happens if you move out of chiral stasis. You see that green arrow that is connecting these two frames. Green arrows indicate the paths we should proceed on, and the black arrows represent where hierarchical power has succeeded in pushing us back, or where we have failed to move forward and therefore fallen back into a previous mode. So it's appropriate, of course, that the green arrow takes us from chiral stasis to catalysis. In catalysis, we are assuming that these horizontal power structures have gotten a foothold and that they are not being actively suppressed. This is sort of like the seed germinating and the sprout coming up out of the ground. In this period of time, hierarchical power has not yet started suppressing this horizontal power structure. This suppression takes place in the next frame, which you might be able to see just a little bit to the right here, A3, or emanation. In this frame, what we see is horizontal power structures being allowed to continue to grow without being actively countervailed by hierarchical power. This is actually the frame that I would say the vast majority of people are in. The vast majority of people are not in chirarchical stasis. Chirarchical stasis, as I said previously, really does not last very long. And a lot of people I talk to, when I first talk with them, they are under the impression they are in chirarchical stasis. But what I ask them to do is then go on a fact-finding mission, trying to find out if there are horizontal power structures of some kind, a horizontal organization or a reading group or something, which already exists. And almost always they discover that one of these groups already exists and they just didn't know about it. What that means is that they are not in chirarchical stasis, they are in catalysis. And I think this is where the majority of the planet is right now. So the conditions of catalysis, as I've noted, are where the government is not actively, militantly, aggressively countervailing these structures. Now, obviously, that is something we expect to take place as our horizontal power structures grow, but in general, hierarchical power structures do not rush to destroy these little nascent or embryonic horizontal power structures. They don't really see them as a threat in this stage. And we can see that this is the case even in places like the United States, where the US government, much as it may not like these horizontal power structures, it's not doing a lot of concerted activity trying to dismantle them at the moment. And that's because many of them have not risen to the level that they are an actual threat to the government.
I started to try to do the thing where I was trying to read your comment and trying to listen to the video, and as I mentioned, I'm not really good at doing that, so I'll just pause the video. That's what's inspiring. I'll be making the argument that people think people who use AI are lazy, yet it is precisely the opposite. Capitalism incentivizes constant production. That is precisely what AI does. So we need people to slow down, stop following the productivist logic of capitalism, and be lazy and observant more. Yes, I get what you're saying now. So I'm processing because there's a whole lot of AI stuff going on. But all of the things that are tumbling in my head and mulling over are not going to be at all helpful for you, Kaimatara, or helpful for our conversation. So I'm just going to move on. I believe that there's a lot of stuff that I want to say about that, Kaimatara, but that I am not prepared to say just yet. I'm not working. Am I doing things right? Hell yeah, you are. Keep not working, Jane. That's exactly what we need. And I've said that before, actually. More people who are just staying at home, I think is kind of what we what we need. Living my life and working in the background. Hell yeah, Matt. That's what's up. That's there are so many people that live to work and who work to live. And I'm actually stealing this from one of my students who, in last week's discussion board, this is one of what they were talking about. And it's really funny. The student doesn't realize what they were talking about was capitalism, right? Their whole post was about how people don't have freedom, how they are constantly struggling between working too hard and this grind culture and trying to figure out how to live, how to survive, and nobody is living their lives. And I want to be like, that's capitalism. Right? You got it. No. So it's about planting seeds, Matt, rather than, and I think I'd mentioned this before, rather than being an idea that young minds rebel against, because that's what young people do to ideas, is they see something and then they rebel against it. Rather than giving anything for my students to rebel against, what I do is I give my students ammunition to rebel against everything else. So it's a lot of my students come away from my class with very obviously anti-capitalist sentiments. Those students don't realize that what they are taking away are anti-capitalist sentiments. They believe that they are making their own mind up about the fact that the world they live in is fucked up. And I'm helping them to understand the ways in which the world that they live in is fucked up. And at some point, my students often do, of their own accord, that light bulb clicks on and they go, wait a minute, this is all just capitalism, right? And with those students, I go, yes, you got it right. That's the point. Congratulations. But if students don't come to that conclusion on their own, I'm not very vocal about it. They're seeds waiting to germinate until those students have watered those ideas enough that they are growing richly in their own soil. That's when I want those students to realize that they are communists, right? Once those seeds have already taken root and begun to sprout, that's when I want them to realize that they are communists. Not before, because there's so much propaganda and there's so much social stigma around those ideas that, right, and it really has to do with the sooner that somebody, well, I guess I'll say it this way. It's when somebody begins to participate in certain ideas like anti-capitalism, they take those things on and it begins to inform their identity. And then when those people see those ideas being attacked out in the real world, they become afraid of having those ideas, right? And what I want is for people to take these ideas up, inform them as part of their identity because they're morally right. They're the morally right things to do. And for people to not give a shit about what other people say they are or think about what is right. I want those people to go, well, call it whatever you want to. Putting people in houses is just the right moral thing. Right? Call it what you want to. Feeding people is just having people having access to healthcare is just the right thing, right? And that's kind of what I'm on about. Yeah, let them learn the terms on their own. Yeah, exactly. It's I'm just giving them the ammunition and planting the seeds so that at some point they'll become, or they'll figure it out.
Now, that might sound like a criticism, but it's actually more a benefit. In fact, These are valuable strategic conditions. When the hierarchical power structure does not realize that something that seeks to destroy it is rising within it, something that may eventually become a threat, that means it gives it more and more time to grow. And we should be seizing this opportunity where we do not have to go into open, active conflict with the mega machine, as I call it, and instead we can just grow and accumulate power into these horizontal power structures. That is to say, catalysis is actually one of the most strategically advantageous positions for us to be in. Even though we have not gotten any leverage in this period of time, this is a period of time where we can kind of grow freely and experiment without being actively suppressed or imprisoned or even killed by the government. So what that means is,
welcome in, Trashomancer. It's good to see you. Hope
you should
doing well.
take advantage of this position as much as is conceivably possible. See it as an opportunity to build up the power of the horizontal organizations that are present and an opportunity to create new ones that may go on to seize the moment. Now, it would be nice if we could stay in this period of catalysis until we had a superior force to destroy the hierarchical power structure that we are within. However, that is highly unlikely. Instead, it is more likely that if we grow to a sufficient strength within this period of catalysis, what will happen is that the state and capital and all of these other hierarchical power structures will indeed try to destroy us. And once that takes place, we are moving into the next frame. The next frame that I have labeled A3 here is what I call emanation. So you see I've got those little arrows going from the edges of the triangle to the circle. Well, those are just meant to indicate that the hierarchical power structure that this horizontal power structure is embedded within is beginning to countervail and attempt to destroy that horizontal power structure. Now, to varying degrees, you are almost always going to be in a kind of mixture between A2 and A3 because the system doesn't just one day decide, now we're going to destroy you. Usually it's that they slowly begin ramping up their efforts. So you might say that as soon as you enter A2 or as soon as you begin catalysis, you're beginning to set forth the conditions that will lead towards emanation. That emanation is going to begin to show itself little by little in escalating attempts at destruction by hierarchical power structures such as the state, capital, white supremacy, and so on.
All right. So what I learned from Koro Moana Jackson, his dad got him to sit and watch the mountain all day. Moana at first didn't know why. It was only until he really thought about it, like the stones rolling off the slopes, that the mountain is moving. It is an apt metaphor against Lenin's vanguard party thinking. You need professional revolutionaries to bring theory to the working class and then have the movement when, as Moana shows, the movement is the teaching moment. Right. One just needs to stop and observe. I really like that. I get that. I think that does a really good job of illustrating the idea. More work to do. That's good. Don't want to get bored. Right. And there's always more to do, Trashnomancer. We've got plenty to try and get accomplished. Absolutely right.
So emanation, as I said, is kind of a gradation from catalysis. However, you are going to generally know when you are in this period of emanation because you are now going to be countervailed by a variety of hierarchical power structures. Not only the state and capital and white supremacy, as I said, but often other organizations that are about your size that are themselves more hierarchical. You'll find that as you become more of a threat to hierarchical structures writ large, you are also going to be seen as a threat to smaller scale hierarchical power structures. And therefore, you're often going to come into conflict with authoritarian organizations of a variety of different kinds. I should note, in this frame, we are not talking about civil war. Civil conflict is a different frame, which comes just after this one. This is instead the situation where all of these hierarchical power structures are beginning to escalate their aggressive efforts, but they have not gone to outright attempts at destruction. Or it should be said, if they are attempting to destroy the horizontal power structures that are rising within them, it has not risen to the level of a civil conflict. I think this frame represents the strategic conditions of a lot of people in a lot of different places on Earth right now. And I know I said that about catalysis, but as I said, these are sort of gradated with one another. Usually the conditions that are taking place is that these horizontal power structures are allowed to grow, but they are being countervailed in a variety of ways by prevailing hierarchical power structures. I think a lot of horizontal revolutionary activity ends in this frame. Once hierarchical power structures begin trying to suppress that horizontal activity, then they're going to move back to the previous frame. And that is to say, they're going to neuter or co-opt or destroy that horizontal power structure until it is no longer a threat. And if they fully destroy it, they will move all the way back to the first frame, which let's pull that right back up. You see we have these black arrows. The black arrows take us back to frame A2, which is to say catalysis. What happens if they co-opt those horizontal power structures, or those horizontal power structures themselves sort of become recuperated, or they simply weaken them and neuter them so that they no longer have any strength to grow. Or, as you see here, there's that other black arrow that takes us all the way back to chiarchical stasis if they destroy that revolutionary horizontal power structure. So what we're attempting to do is we're trying to move with all of these green arrows and against those black arrows. Those black arrows, those benefit our enemy, and the green arrows benefit us. So as you can see, if you're looking at this, this branches in a few different ways. Back at catalysis, we could have branched into what I call extended catalysis. Extended catalysis is where we have numerous horizontal organizations beginning to arise. And I know that may not seem like it's enormously different from just catalysis, but it is. And that's because it then leads down into these other frames you see here. It opens up the conditions for horizontal power structures to either cooperate or come into conflict. We're going to get to that here in a moment. First, I just want to go down this first branch to the frame I have labeled as A4. So A4 is what I've labeled secession. Secession is the occasion where a horizontal power structure sort of removes itself from the hierarchical power structure. So this one, I would say, doesn't take place very often, but it does take place sometimes. I think the Zapatistas, for example, are a good example of this. What they've done is they have separated from the hierarchical power structure. Now, you'll notice there's still these arrows between the hierarchical power structure and the horizontal power structure. And that's because even after they secede, they're still going to be in conflict with that horizontal power structure. They're not going to get to just leave the hierarchical power and then...
Welcome in, DJ Che. Thank you so much for the raid. I really appreciate it. Looks like we have some breaking news. I don't know how breaking it is, but 2 National Guard members shot and the White House is on lockdown. That's really quite interesting. Thank you for the thank you for letting me know, Matt. I'll check that out in just a minute. But thank you, DJ Che, for the raid. It's so good to see you. I hope you're doing well. Good to see you. About an hour ago. Okay, I'll start doing some digging on that.
Go create a new society in the wilderness, or maybe not in the wilderness, as the case may be in some occasions, like Rojava, but instead they are going to be in a position where they are still stuck in conflict with either the hierarchical power structure that they came from or other hierarchical power structures in their region. This is the beginning of actual open revolutionary conflict, because the hierarchical power structure is not going to just allow us to separate ourselves from it and begin to create our own autonomous region, having consumed that region likely from their territory. For that reason, we are probably going to enter into all kinds of different militant and violent escalation with the state and capital and other hierarchical power structures. This is also where we are now entering into the era of geopolitics. We are not only going to have to concern ourselves with the hierarchical power structure that we have separated from, we are actually also going to have to deal with other hierarchical power structures in the region who probably see us as a threat, and very rightly so. In my study, I think that this situation mostly arises when a horizontal power structure sort of leaves the main urban centers and goes out to more rural areas, or areas that have been largely neglected or left alone by the hierarchical power structure in that area. So that is the situation for both the Zapatistas and Rojava, for example. And you'll note that in both occasions, they are now having to enter an era of more concerted military conflict. For the Zapatistas, it is only now escalating, but for Rojava, it has been a fact of life for quite some time. So this method of secession is one method you can take. However, I don't think that this is necessarily accessible to everyone. I think this is largely going to be the outcome of circumstance. Instead, I think the situation we're going to end up in is that other frame that I skipped over. If you are in an urban center, I think it is very likely that what you should be doing is going from catalysis or emanation and to this adjacent catalysis that I mentioned a minute ago. That's because I find it is most necessary when you are in these urban centers to create numerous horizontal power structures that all meet people where they are at and satisfy people's needs within their own particular intersections. And it's also important because then it moves into this frame here that I call extended catalysis. So you'll note here in this frame, extended catalysis, we're going from having two of these horizontal organizations to now these horizontal organizations being federated together to now federations of horizontal organizations coming together. So this right here, this is more of a description of, for example, the C&T FAI in Spain. They didn't go that other path that I talked about where they seceded. Don't get me wrong, there was some aspect of this secession activity right here. However, that was mostly in the countrysides. In the urban centers, instead, they did this activity where they built up these organizations in the urban centers and they federated them together and they got bigger and bigger and bigger and formed a bigger and bigger power structure that was more and more of a threat. So the C&T FAI was actually going through two of these paths at the same time. That's probably part of the reason why that things worked out so well for them. In the urban centers, they did this extended catalysis, and in rural areas, they did secession. So extended catalysis is very powerful because you are building up numerous horizontal power structures that they have to defeat. They cannot just destroy one horizontal power structure. Now they have to destroy federations of horizontal power structures. And historically, we can see that is almost impossible for hierarchical power structures to do. Once you've got it built up that big, it is very, very difficult for them to defeat outright. Instead, they have to go through things like recuperation, or they try to co-opt it, or people within the organization turn it into a hierarchy. This frame right here, I think, is what most people in urban centers should be aiming for. However, I also want to note that during this period of time, you could end up in this frame I have labeled B2B, which is where you actually come into conflict with other horizontal power structures. And I call this self-sabotage. And that's because I think this is the most counterproductive frame in the entire flowchart. Coming into conflict with other horizontal power structures in your area is just doing the work of hierarchical power power structures in your area. That's exactly what they would want to happen. The inability of horizontal power structures to practice solidarity with one another and to overcome their differences and to try to correct their mistakes is probably one of the most foolish things that we have normalized in the modern era.
Well, I'm going to go back and let them reassert that point, because I think that's a good point. But I like this. Right, recession in that form seems hard in most places, good if there's enough space. Could materially recede largely in the U.S. just by putting together an umbrella corpora to represent the people in the project. Much easier to disassociate that way. The corpo would still do the do, but the folk wouldn't have to do day to day. Right, they wouldn't have to. They could just go about their daily lives and wouldn't have to worry about the daily of the corpa. It would run itself. Or a trust, which could also be a very powerful tool. Yeah. And I think that that's not a bad idea. The reality for the United States, for much of it, like, what am I trying to say here? So the place where I live, there are lots of people out in the middle of nowhere. Lots of people out in the middle of nowhere. There are no cops here. There is no law. And this is something that I've talked about before. If I call the police and say, hey, there's a problem, the police might say, that's too bad. We don't have anybody to send out to your area until tomorrow or the next day. Right? That's the reality for where I am. There is no government. There is no the state where I am. And lots of rural America is like that. And in all of those places, in all of those places, we can build movements and structures that are their own power structures that don't depend on the state. And we should be doing that. Right? In cities, it's much more difficult to be under the radar because there are police and there are people and there's stuff going on. Everything is on the radar everywhere you are in every city. But there are lots of places that aren't. And I think that there is a good point here. That there is an opportunity, and this is something that Beau of the Fifth Column used to talk about an awful lot before they took their hiatus, was the potential for rural organizing. Because when you go to small town rural areas, those people vote Republican. But if you talk to those people, they are not Republican people. They are the kind of people who don't trust the state. They are the kind of people who habitually come together and work together to solve their own problems, who don't depend on the state or the police or any kind of help at all. They are the kind of people who are used to being self-sufficient, self-determined, self-made people who are interested in organizing themselves and establishing structures which will protect and insulate those people in those communities. That's the kind of thing that those people are into. And so if you can get involved with those people and doing the kinds of things that they're already because they already do that. To live in a small rural, in the middle of nowhere place, you have to know people. You have to network. You have to organize. You have to help your neighbor and get help from your neighbor. There's no other way to survive. And so it's there's a lot of potential, currently untapped potential in rural places like this. A trust is nice as its charter can be bent to extremes of detail or ambiguity as needed. Trust can do all sorts of things. Rich person's cheat code, right? Excellent. Yeah. Yeah, we'll do some more looking into that, Trashnomancer, for sure. I think there's some good avenues to pursue there.
We have forgotten what solidarity is all about, and in one another and to overcome their differences and to try to correct their mistakes is probably one of the most foolish things that we have normalized in the modern era. We have forgotten what solidarity is all about, and instead we need to be focusing on trying to create federations of these horizontal power structures where we all come together and cooperate.
And that's why I want to have that conversation about leftist perfectionism and how it is that we are supposed to go about policing ourselves and each other in ways that are productive and not counterproductive in literally this way.
Because if we do not, we may end up in this other frame I have here called megamechanical recolonization. So megamechanical recolonization is where one of those horizontal power structures becomes a hierarchical power structure. So I know this name, megamechanical recolonization, is kind of a mouthful, but if you actually watch A Modern Anarchism, the series, you'll know what I'm talking about with megamechanical colonization. But what I'm basically saying is that we are helping the hierarchical power structure of society reclaim a piece of its territory that it had previously lost, because one of our horizontal power structures has now become a hierarchical power structure, and hierarchical power structures at a miniature scale benefit the larger meta-scale hierarchical power structures of society. I should note, this frame is not just about our horizontal power structures coming into conflict. That was actually modeled in the previous frame. This frame represents the situation where one of our horizontal power structures becomes a hierarchical power structure. That can either happen by them being co-opted by authoritarian interests, or being recuperated by prevailing hierarchical power structures of society, but it can also happen by this internal horizontal power structure forming informal hierarchies by way of cults of personality, and because they refuse to formalize delegation and other functions. This can then place one or two people really at the top of the structure, and no one else is able to question anything. This can also take place in an informal sense through what is called a duocracy.
Real quick, charters can be written freehand, can have most any guidelines and intentions within trust laws. They're really vague, yes. They are really, really, really very vague, and you have almost carte blanche to do any kind of organizing or structure that you would like to do any kind of end with, and there's almost no limitations on those whatsoever. An interesting thing as well is that you can get them formally recognized by the government, actually. You pay them money, and they formalize all of that for you. But as a caveat, most states have provisions to where if you have some kind of charter or agreement, and as long as everybody who is involved agrees to that charter and agreement, no formalization is necessary. You don't have to include the government. You don't have to declare. You don't have to pay any fees or do any. You can, and you're encouraged, obviously, by the state to do so. But you don't have to, and you can still have the same kind of legal binding that you would hope without the formal legal structures there. Just a interesting quick side there.
In duocracies, quite often, the 2 or 3 people who do everything end up having all the de facto power because there are no formal decision-making systems. Because in formal decision-making systems, even those people who are not completely active, the people who are not every single day there doing all of the exact tasks, are also part of the deliberation and decision-making process. So this prevents the hierarchy from arising from a duocracy. However, these can very much still turn into hierarchical power structures. In fact, sometimes in consensus systems, if they are not watched closely, hierarchical entryists can turn them into hierarchical power structures. This is one of the worst things that could happen when we are carrying out revolutionary activity. It represents the movement backwards and a victory for the mega machine. But let's get into some of the spicier frames on this roadmap. So I talked about this situation called emanation, where the hierarchical power structures of the society we're in are beginning to countervail us. However, we have to consider the possibility that our horizontal power structure could actually prevail in this conflict. And in this situation, we would end up here in this frame that I've called C1, or civil conflict. This frame, as it sounds, is going to be characterized by open conflict with the hierarchical power structure that characterizes society. This will also probably be punctuated by civil war activity where we are fighting with other people who are civilians within our society. This is an era of armed combat. There is no way out of it. If we end up becoming more powerful than the hierarchical power structure which we arose from, it will fight us to the death, and it will summon all of its geopolitical allies. So this frame is one that we often sort of romanticize on the left. We hope to get into this situation where we will be able, through force of arms, to simply overthrow the hierarchical power structures which characterize society. However, I just want to note that this is a very bloody method. It's actually, I would say, more bloody than that secession method, but it is the outcome of being stuck with the mega machine. That is to say, it's the outcome of being stuck within the urban centers where we can't really escape hierarchical power structures. We can't just disappear and begin forming things while they don't notice. We are going to have to form it right under their nose. And if we become more powerful than them, that's not something that's just going to go under the radar. We are going to end up in a struggle to the death with this slowly withering hierarchical power structure. That is going to be openly militant and will absolutely require for us to have militias and federations of militias and so on in order to crush the state and capital and white supremacy and all of these forces of reaction which will absolutely arise within this period of civil conflict. And I should note, there are green arrows coming from 2 different places to civil conflict. That is to say, if you came here from emanation, which probably took place because you got powerful enough back here in catalysis, then you can go straight to civil conflict because your power structure is just enough to actually go to war with the hierarchical power structure. However, there's also a green arrow coming from here, extended catalysis. Extended catalysis is another situation where you are arising in the urban centers, and therefore you don't have this opportunity to secede and to just claim autonomy away from the hierarchical power structure. Instead, you are going to be forced into conflict with it. So if you can succeed in civil conflict, that means you enter into this frame here that I have labeled C2. C2 is autonomy. C2 and this other frame up here called A5 are actually identical. They represent autonomy. That is to say, you are no longer being actively countervailed by the hierarchical power structure that you arose from. You are able to sustain your own people. You've begun to develop what I call a horizontal hegemony. That is to say, horizontal society is now the absolute cultural default. And that means that you are able to then begin sort of solidifying your wins. This is where I expect that you would begin to see this sort of more than the sum of its parts behavior, this behavior of emergence that I discussed in one of the previous parts. I should also note, because A5 comes out of secession, this can also be the result of just successfully struggling for secession. So like if the Zapatistas or Rojava are able to get autonomy from, say, the Mexican state or the Syrian state, that will represent this A5 condition, or the C2 position as I've located it here. I think there might be some particulars which will differ between these, but I would need to see more experimental data in order to discern the differences between C2 and A5. However, I think these C2 and A5 are basically what we are aiming for in the near-term future. These are achievable in decades. However, they are going to be very hard fought. They are either going to come through this period of civil conflict, which will be very brutal, or they are going to come through this period of secession, which will be very difficult. So either you go out into rural areas and you secede, or you come into open militant conflict inside of the urban centers, and you're probably going to end up having to do guerrilla combat in either of these in conflict with the hierarchical power structures of society. However, this frame of C2, this autonomy frame, is absolutely what we are aiming for. We are trying to create a sort of regional autonomy where we are no longer reliant on the hierarchical power structure, and the hierarchical power structure has had to concede our autonomy. That it is no longer trying to destroy us, or if it is, it no longer has leverage to do so.
That's what I was waiting for, is for some kind of comment about the leverage. Fantastic. That the Anarch is using autonomy specifically here. Notice that Anarch hasn't said anything about us being free yet, right? When we can liberate ourselves from the fetters of the state's domination, that's when we have autonomy. That's when we get to choose for ourselves in whatever way we would like to choose. Right now, we don't have autonomy. We don't choose anything about our material conditions except for how we respond to our material conditions. We don't have autonomy. We are controlled by the state. When we wrestle enough control from the state, we get autonomy. That's not the same as freedom, right? We still have a long way to go to get to freedom. Hypothetically, theoretically, but this gives us the space to actually figure out the prefiguration of tomorrow's society. Right now, we don't have that option. We don't have that opportunity. Right now, we are trying to figure out how to prefigure the pre-revolution. Right? How to make the material conditions such that revolutionary potential is possible. Right? We are not trying to build a society for tomorrow yet. That's not part of our prefigurative process. We are still trying to figure out how to get into the pre-revolutionary mode so that we can reach this level. And at this level is when we begin prefiguring the kind of society that we want to actually live in, right? When we have the autonomy to be able to do what we would like to do without having to respond to the state. But let me go back and address some of this stuff, some of this awesome stuff that Trash Nomancer is dropping in here. Plenty of legal venues that would allow enough window to launch a project. What things are in movement A lot harder to stop. And that is a really good point that I wanted to draw attention to, Trashnomancer, that with any of these kind of movements, once you begin to amass quote-unquote power, once you've amassed any kind of power, you have already been successful. Because having amassed some kind of power requires the state power to shift and reorient it itself to be reactionary to you, right? We live in a state of reactionary survival against the state. And if we can actually create any kind of power, it forces the state to have to react to us. And that's what we want, because when we can get the state to be reactive, it is no longer in control of how the power of that power is asserted. It's kind of hard to understand, but the power doesn't have control over itself as a power. The powers that of the state that squash us, they're not powers that are directed coherently or intentionally, necessarily. In most cases, state powers move to counter or to prevent, right? And when they do that, they do so out of necessity, not because somebody wants to or because somebody decides it's a good idea. The state does that and moves that power within the state because it must. It doesn't have a choice. And that's an important thing for us to recognize about the existence of power and state power, is that the way that it moves and reacts is not out of choice. It's always out of necessity. So if we can get it to move, to be reactionary to us, then we get to direct it in ways that it cannot direct itself. We actually get to pick up the reins, as it were, and not really steer, but direct. Just have to build a good deck and hold out long enough for the combo to unfold. I think this is a Magic the Gathering analogy. If not, then it is a good Magic the Gathering analogy. But yeah, you have to build a good deck and hold out long enough for the combo to unfold. Hope you don't get slapped by the opposition. Legally recede via a legal umbrella. No, and there's lots of different and once we get started, there's lots of different tactics and strategies that we can adopt at that point too. As the Rastafarian once said, emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but yourselves can free our minds. Yep. Another path is to simply outgrow systems. Don't need to fight, don't need to run, just to claim sunlight. That needs a lot more unpacking, but I think I know what you mean. With outgrowth, so you're I think, Trashnomancer, you're already alluding to the formalization of dual state powers, rather than us doing something against the state. What we do is we build something that the state is supposed to be doing, but is doing for us very poorly. Like education is a good example, right? If we find ways that we can make formal structures to educate the public about worker class relations and about seizing the means of production and making those things become their own, giving them their own momentum, right? That these things become a power of their own. Then we don't need to do anything. We don't need to fight that fight. We just need to create the opportunity for people to grow and learn and to get access. What's it called? The archive. Is it the Marxist archive? What is it I'm thinking of? The online archive with all the communist readings. I use it all the time. But that kind of platform, it's anarchistly run, and it's completely free, and it's just the free dissemination of information for the sake of free information. That itself is revolutionary. Libcom, no. What is it called? Marxist.org is the website, but it's called something. I guess it's just called the Marxists Internet Archive. I thought that it had a different name, but it's just Marxist.org. For those of you who are not familiar with Marxist.org, go check it out. It's awesome. It's just a whole bunch of free anarchist and communist literature that you can just read for whole books that you can just read for free on the internet. It's great revolutionary content. That's where I got Proudhon. I'd mentioned before that I have my students read Proudhon, and I downloaded it from the Marxist archive, and I've kept the stamp. So I have a PDF printout that I've printed out of the work, and it has all of the Marxist.org watermarks at the top and the bottom of the page, and it's I like exposing my students to anarchist library. I knew that there was another one. There's an anarchist library. That's the one that I'm thinking of too. Gutenberg Project also has a great online archive of information. Anarchist Archive. That's what I was thinking of. Or Anarchist Library. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Exactly. There you go. But yes, and those are ways that we undermine the state. Those are ways that we undermine capitalism, that take on a power of their own. In ways that even if we're stopped, those things don't, right? And that's part of this strategy, is developing tactics that work even when we don't, right? That there's I've got an idea for a writing project. No, I'm going to put a pin. No, that's okay. I thought I was going to write something down, but that's all right. Yeah, I'm just deciding if I want to move on or if I want to go back and actually think a lot more about this. But I think I just want to move on. Yeah, good. Yeah, have the better product, and that's what it's something that I've talked about before. With the way that our healthcare system has failed Americans in general. And with the shutdowns that we're going to see in the coming months or years, where hospitals begin to no longer be funded and they just start closing their doors all across the United States. This is going to be a really big problem next year, is that hospitals all across the United States are just going to start closing their doors because they don't have a way to pay their bills. And this is an opportunity for us to build some kind of power structure that is doing the thing that governments pretend that they are supposed to do, right? That is actually caring for their people. We have the opportunity to build something, to make a kind of power structure that helps people, makes people's lives better, gives them something to do, gives them something to hope for, gives them something that they can see that is not the government controlling their lives, right? And I don't have any ideas beyond that, other than when hospitals start shutting down, we need to have a plan and start to do stuff with that energy. Yeah, why is capitalism so hell-bent on killing people? I know it needs people. Doesn't capitalism know that it needs people? One of those antagonistic contradictions. One of those internal antagonisms. Can make an organizational dandelion, game over. Right. Iconography. I gotcha. Animal, the ant, and the flower, the dandelion. Huh. Hostages make compromises. Oh, that's a good saying. That's a really good saying, Trashdomancer. Hostages make compromises. That's one I haven't heard before, but is so very true about capitalism. It thinks we're going to breed like rabbits. They don't know young people these days. Right. The kids are not interested in being baby factories. That one's going to backfire. Huh. Dandelion has made it to every continent, every backyard, every field, every sidewalk. Huh. There's a lot of power in that kind of pervasiveness. I like that.
Now have the ability to maintain our territory and to come into a sort of harmonious horizontal functioning. This right here, frames C2 and A5, this is actually what I'm talking about in the video after the revolution. A lot of people thought that in that video after the revolution, I was talking about some society where we had completely destroyed all of hierarchical society beforehand, and that I was laying out some sort of perfect utopia. That is not the case at all. Instead, what I was doing was laying out the conditions of this frame right here. And I mention that because in the video after the revolution, I'm kind of talking about a mixed system, a system where the entire market is controlled by cooperatives and federations of workers and consumers, and at the same time has an enormous decommodified sector. And a lot of people have brought up, like, why do you have this sort of mixed system? And the reason is because during this period of regional autonomy, before we've had some complete global revolution, we are going to be stuck trading both inside of our autonomies, between our autonomies, and with the rest of the world that has not yet become horizontal.
Well, and we're working with people who have not been prefiguratively formed, right? We are still working with people who are the product of a capitalist coercive system. So those people are not used to making their own decisions or operating with any kind of real responsibility over themselves, right? And these are going to be things that we have to figure out how to maneuver and navigate and how to incorporate into our organizing strategies, right? And this is when we're thinking about the means ends unity, right? We understand that where we want to go is way over here. What we want is to end up in the utopian idea that Marx had given us. but we can't get there, right? And not only can we not get there, we can't even get to the step next to that, or even to the step next to that one. And in our means ends unity, we have to keep that telos, the utopian idea in mind, but we have to reckon with our current material conditions and the prefigurative step that we need to be on before we can get to the next step. So we prefigure for this relationship, for the material conditions we have, so that we can make this step possible. Once we are in this step, we'll have to then we'll have to re-envision that telos from our new material condition, and then look at the next step, right? For prefiguring ourselves in this situation so that we can get to the next step. And it's going to be a step by step by step process. That's Anarch mentioned that they think that this is something that's potentially possible within decades. And I mean, maybe. Maybe. I don't know that I'm that optimistic. I think that it will take, I think I'd mentioned this before, it will take more than 2 generations for us to get anywhere in the ballpark. And we're at 2 generations, we're already talking about almost 100 years. Before we are in the kind of place where I believe that it's possible for us to get to the real prefigurative spot where we have some kind of real autonomy. I just need to offer, yeah, okay. Just need to offer them spots to plug in easily, onboarding, make the outer edges extremely permeable so folk can move in and out with resources easily, and offer their energy and structure without entanglement. And I think that's a really good model to let people just come and go. They can try before they buy, and then you just make the project super addictive. Things can change really fast. Oh yeah, I mean, that's true. But there's an element there too, Trashnomancer, that it's the propaganda of the deed. When people participate in systems and they see those systems are feeding people and housing people and meeting their needs and making those people feel fulfilled, you're right, the proof is in the pudding. When people see the pudding, they're going to want to participate in making that pudding. Is how I feel about it. We don't have to try to make the project appealing. It will be. It will be appealing. It right now, in fact, that's one of the things that you weren't here when I was talking about this. Here, let me plug this in chat again real fast. Trashnomancer, check out this video. I think you'll like it. One of the things that this video talks about is the disaffected youth. That there are so many people in the upcoming generations that are not swayed by the promises that swayed our parents and our grandparents. The things that your parents and your grandparents clung to, that they believed in, that they thought were worthwhile, those things have all proven to be a lie. Here in the United States, particularly, all of those things have been proven to be a lie. So the younger generation are completely disillusioned by all of those things. And that's kind of what the FBI is labeling as nihilism, is the fact that the social fabric of the social contract is completely broken down because our societies are using us as cogs rather than being some kind of reciprocal relationship where we have meaningful existence with each other. Because that hasn't happened in a long time. That hasn't existed for a long time. And even the memory of a time when that was real is so distant that nobody alive even remembers when that was real. Right? We are so far detached from that kind of idea having any kind of compulsive incentive, their kind of power over people. Right? There's no reason for people to believe that playing by the rules will get them anywhere. That's where we are, is the system has shown people that there is no reason to follow the rules because our culture and society systemically benefit people who blatantly break the rules. Yeah, by design it will be appealing, yeah. That's how I feel about bananas and oranges. Appealing. Shame is stale. Yeah, there's another thing. I'm glad that you brought that up. There's another thing that I want to talk about with regard to shame. Later, putting a pin in this, but it seems like a lot of the general consensus is now that shame, rather than being an effective social motivator to change people's mind, that shame just gets people to hide their behaviors better. And because culture and society doesn't really care about what people do, it just cares about public image. So there's a growing concern that shame culture or that cancel culture, rather than having a productive, beneficial effect where it makes people's lives better and freer, that it just pushes people's nefarious behaviors into the corner where they can do that unabraded. They can be in the shadows and just do whatever they want to. And it makes the situation worse, actually. But I haven't done a lot of research into that. I've only just been introduced to that idea. I'm not sure how I feel about it yet. So we'll talk about that later. Kaya Matara, that I'm gonna have to remember that pun for the future. The pun is insulting. Liberalism is a lie. 100. Yeah. It was only true for a small minority of apartheid monsters. Yeah. Shame is abuse. Negative reinforcement is a tiny fraction as effective as positive. I completely 100% agree with that. I remember when I was really young, I remember getting into an argument with my father about motivators. And one thing that he said, I was a teenager at the time, and this has always stuck with me. Where my father said, well, violence and fear are the best motivators. And it was kind of an aha moment. Not that my dad has a good point here. It was an aha moment in that the approach that I was taking to try to convince my dad that I was right was never going to work, because my dad believes that might makes right. I was trying to make a principled argument and appealing to his better judgment. But that will never, ever, ever be effective for somebody who is motivated by fear. By somebody who believes, actually, that fear is the best motivator. Right? And there was kind of a light bulb went off in my head where I was like, I am not using my time usefully, wisely, by engaging in this conversation with this person in this way. I didn't take the right takeaways from it. But that's neither here nor there. Right? But I still remember that, the authority of my father, who believes that he knows more about the world and he is just correcting a child who doesn't understand, who has said to me, right, fear is the best motivator. And me realizing I'm wasting my time with somebody who is incapable of understanding my argument, who is incapable of understanding the principle of this thing that I'm trying to argue here. Yeah, dogma is impossible to fight. Inversely, negative reinforcement is when you reward by removing a stimuli. Positive reinforcement is when you add stimuli to reward. Right. Inversely, negative reinforcement. That's a completely different kind of tactic that would work in a different kind of way entirely. It's wild that I don't really know that much about inversely negative enforcement. Oh, inversely. I misunderstood you. Gotcha. And inversely, negative reinforcement is when you reward by removing a stimuli. Well, not necessarily. Negative reinforcement can take place, can be a positive, can be adding to or taking away from, I think. Inverse to the previous. I gotcha. Shame is positive punishment where we're adding to the stimulation and punishing. I see. Now I gotcha. Now I gotcha. Shame is positive punishment. We're adding to the stimulation and punishing. Negative reinforcement is when you withhold something to punish. Okay. Negative reinforcement is when you reward by removing a stimuli. Positive reinforcement is when you add something. Okay. You are adding clarification to the way that we are using the terms because I am using the terms clumsily. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, no, and that's why I really appreciate it. I'm just taking a second to. I'm trying to do a few things. I'm trying to really commit this, because it matters. Because language matters, and how we use the language is important. And I see that there is tell him you're not going to his funeral if he doesn't change. I'm pretty sure my dad knows. But maybe I should tell him explicitly, Jane. Maybe I should Fairly sure it is a play or a different model than my understanding. Perhaps the difference is vernacular. I'm speaking of punishment versus praise. Yes, no, and that's Matt is making a different kind of distinction. You're not wrong, Trashnomancer, for your ideas. The language that you are using, Matt is saying that the way that you and I, because I was using the language in the same way that you were using the language, our ideas are not mistaken. The way that we are using the language is inconsistent with the way that that language is used formally in psychology. Yes. Right. Yes. Yeah. And it is a bit of semantics, right? So, and this is something that I tell my students all the time. I don't care if you know what the word is or what the word means. I don't care. If you understand the concept, explain the concept to me, and then you will have proven that you get it. I don't care what word you call it. If you get the idea, right? Because and this comes up all the time. I think I mentioned this when I was talking on stream about the difference between freedom and autonomy. In my classroom, almost every semester, I have a student that goes, "It seems to me like those concepts should be switched." It doesn't matter. If you think of freedom as this and autonomy as this, and the authors are using it in a different way, it doesn't fucking matter. Those concepts are different. That's the point, is we're talking about, you have been thinking about these things as the same thing, and they're not the same thing. They are different concepts. That's the important takeaway. Is not that you are calling this one the right one and this one the right one. Doesn't really matter, as long as you understand the concepts. When you go to convey those ideas to somebody else, if you're not using a uniform or widely accepted way of speaking about those ideas, then you're going to run into trouble. That's a different problem than as long as you understand, right? That for me, the point is usually about comprehension. It's colloquialism. And one of the other things that I was when I was like, I'm just taking a minute to commit this. One of the other things that I was thinking about, Jane, I fear that it may be more than just a matter of colloquial difference. And I don't know, I want to spend some time thinking about this, but it wouldn't surprise me if the common vernacular is inaccurate, not on purpose, but there's an intentional reason why the vernacular is confusing. In the same way that the language around positive and negative liberty, I believe, has actually been intentionally, nefariously subverted. That the language and the conversations around negative and positive liberty, that the people who were in those conversations went out of their way to muddy the waters as best as they possibly can, so that the language was going to be confusing and that we were not going to be able to make much academic headway on those, which we haven't in decades. Yeah, for a malicious reason. And it's what's hard about this is, and this, I know we'll get back to the video. This has been a really long aside. But what's hard about this is there is a tendency for us to talk about powers and these kinds of ideas as though there is somebody pulling the levers or making the decisions. And this is one of those times in which I think it might be helpful to appeal to this idea that Kayamatara was talking about of Taniwa. And I hope that I'm not using this idea incorrectly. But if we can think about the ideas of ideas in Spirited, in a way that becomes almost the kind of thing that you can anthropomorphize. How am I trying to say this? No, I really haven't thought enough about this idea. I'm not going to try and shoot from the hip. Okay, so let me just stop right there, because I'm just shooting from the hip. A philosophical idea that I am just starting to play with, and I haven't really thought much about. So let me just back up. I'll backpedal a little bit, and I'll save that for later, I think. It's inaccurate because that's what the oppressive system wants. Right. And that's the thing. It's weird to think about a system as wanting something. Right? Philosophically speaking, we call this a problem of fit. Sometimes people talk about the universe, what the universe wants from you, or right, but the universe doesn't want anything. It's not the kind of thing that gives a shit, right? That's a problem of fit. It's not that kind of thing, and it's hard to think about systems as the kind of things that would want. But if we recall, when I was talking about powers, especially state powers, it's less about somebody making a decision, right? And more about the power having to shift itself in one way or another by necessity, right? If we can amass enough power so that the state has to do something about that power, that will require the state to shift itself and to reorient itself, not in a kind of targeted or deliberate way. It will do so out of necessity, not because it wants to, not because it thinks it's a good idea, not because it goes, well, if I don't do that, I won't survive. None of that is really what's going on. It just does, as a course of necessity. What's in a name? A rose by any other name would still be a bunch of sex organs. Something like that. I think that's exactly how Shakespeare had phrased it. Humans are systems. Humans are systems. Humans have wants, therefore systems can have wants. And then that's yes, I don't know. There's still a problem of fit there. But there is a problem of fit, but the problem of fit doesn't matter. More to your point, is whether or not the systems do actually want anything, they act that way. Right, and that's the takeaway. Whether or not we can impose any kind of anthropomorphic conception onto them in the way that we think about our wants, if that's helpful for us, then sure. But at the end of the day, that's what the systems do. Whether or not they have any kinds of desires in the way that humans do, right? that's a semantic philosophical inquiry that I don't think is actually very productive or helpful or necessary for figuring anything out. Systems function that way. And I think that we can use that, and that's good enough. We're all human, not just most of us. That's awesome. All right, let's that was a really good aside. Let's get back to the video. I think we're getting close to the end. Yeah, let's get this wrapped up.
And so that's how you should interpret what's happening in After the Revolution. I'm talking about that frame just after we have exited the era of civil conflict, or when our secession has been successful. I make this mention because this conversation about how would an anarchist society be structured, it's often hard to figure out exactly which of these frames they're asking about. Because a lot of the time when they are asking me what I think an anarchist society would be structured like, I'm talking about this frame, the frame right after we have defeated the hierarchical power structure that we originated from, and we now have a sort of regional autonomy. However, a lot of the time people get this mixed up with the next frame that I'm going to look at. This next frame is what I call adjacent autonomy. So adjacent autonomy, which I have labeled here as D1, is this frame where we have begun to establish numerous autonomous regions that are all horizontal. In this period, we can now begin coordinating these horizontal regions with one another, which will build the power of all of those horizontal regions. And this is the period of time when we are going to begin to have leverage over the hierarchical power structures of society. Whereas the previous frames that I've laid out could probably take place in the course of just a few decades, I think that this era will probably enter us into that century mark and will probably endure past a century. We will probably be fighting back against hierarchical power structures, even the prevailing hierarchical power structures like the state and capital and so on, for a very long period of time, because they're not just going to go away. We are going to have to establish these autonomous regions in a variety of places if we ever wish to stomp out the forces of reaction globally. And I mention this because this is another one of those frames where the conditions are going to be different. So now that we have adjacent autonomy of all of these regions, we could actually begin to abolish a great deal of the market system, and we could actually then be able to subsume a lot of our internal relations into these sort of decommodified, communistic, direct distribution mechanisms. And I think that we can't do that before we have moved into this era, because we are still going to be stuck trading with all of these external entities. However, during this period, we are now going to be doing trade with probably mostly those other horizontal power structures. And that means that we can actually now begin trying out these new methods of distribution that don't require money and wages and all of these other things. So taking us back here, I just want to note, you'll see that there is this green line that is coming out of this frame. And you might be saying, well, where's that going? And the answer is, it goes back over here, all the way up to this. Which that may not make sense, because that frame, this adjacent catalysis frame, this was said to represent the situation where we are arising within a sort of regional hierarchical power structure. However, here is where I'm establishing a sort of iterative loop. This now represents the new scale. This is now the global scale, and the hierarchical power structure is that of the sort of global imperial hegemons, which we are now coming into conflict with. And so that means that because we are now stuck in this larger body, we're not going to be able to do secession again, right? We can't do secession for the same reason that you can't really...
I absolutely get your critique, Trashnomancer, and it's something that so as an educator, what you are pointing out is something that was obviously a problem to me right off the rip. When the whole thing, when this first video first started, that was I saw that there was a big map, and there was one big map, and then immediately we zoomed into a small part of it, and then we just as an educator, when I map things, if I'm going to map things, I have to map it in almost a childlike fashion, and it seems insulting almost to my college students that I would have to do that. But different brains think of things in different ways. So if I map something out, you go to one place and then immediately you zoom back out and see the whole. So that the next place that you go to, you understand where it is in relation to the other thing. And then when you leave that thing, it zooms out to the whole again. And you have to navigate the whole every time you're navigating one of the parts. And that's something that as an educator, I'm used to having to lead people in a certain kind of way. And Anarch is probably more accustomed to dealing with theory nerds who want to argue about stuff on the internet. And so, when it comes to those theory nerds, as soon as, where are we right now? 3809, right? A theory nerd is going to get to this part of the video.
Into it. Let's take a look.
They're going to go to this part of the video, and they're going to print this out, or they're going to draw their own map, right? And they're going to, theory nerds don't need to be spoon-fed. They don't need to be walked through. They don't need any help navigating. Theory nerds are about diving in without any guidance or any and that's probably what Anarch is used to dealing with this. And I'm making assumptions. I don't know very much about Anarch as a person. Maybe they are an educator, but my impression is that Anarch is not an educator who is used to having to for lack of better words, spoon feed the content in a way that is obvious, right? That I think that makes sense. You might have missed the beginning of the video. So like the triangle represents hierarchy, and circle represents flat structures, horizontal structures. So that's and the squares are just modes, right? That's where we are in a certain time slice. And so you've only got those three symbols. The symbols seem like they're like a lot of them are really complicated or complex, but they're really not. Like this one is the arrows pushing in. The arrows are pushing in from the triangle to the circle, right? So the hierarchy is oppressing the horizontal structure. So without a key, if you miss the first few minutes of the video, you don't get any of the key. You don't get any of that setup or any of that understanding. So of course the visuals don't make much sense to you. So yeah. Well, there you go. That hopefully will help things make a lot more sense. Oh, let me share this too. I haven't done this yet. What the heck did I just do? That's okay. Oh no. There, that's good. Just two modes and the relationship between them. Yes. Yes. And that's exactly right. Either we are dealing with hierarchy or we are dealing with horizontal structures. And everything is just a derivation of that. And so, like with this, see if I can get my cursor to show up. Yeah, right. So with this, we have multiple horizontal structures in the hierarchical structure. And where's the other example? This, I like the Confederation one. This is one of my favorites. Right, so this is where you have horizontal structures that are working together to form power structures within the hierarchical situation, right? So this is confederacy where they're working together. Yeah, you're getting by. You always do a pretty good job of tracking when you're here, so.
Stuck in this larger body. We're not going to be able to do secession again, right? We can't do secession for the same reason that you can't really do secession when you're building groups in the middle of urban city centers. Like in the urban city centers where we are stuck alongside these hierarchical power structures, like we will be once we go to the era of geopolitics, we are going to have to go through this process of cooperation, then federation, then federations of federations. Okay, you see that this models the same thing as when we arose in the urban centers. So, unfortunately, that means that once we get to that stage, we are going to have to go to civil conflict. That's just the next thing that comes. We are going to have to go into a long era of protracted geopolitical warfare with those hierarchical power structures in society, and we hope that we end up here with leverage over those hierarchical power structures after we've done that adjacent regional autonomy that we discussed a minute ago. And so here, if we can carry this out, if we iterate this loop over and over and over at various scales, then we will eventually end up in a situation where hierarchical power structures have been defeated and all that is left is horizontal power structures covering the face of the planet. Now, obviously, there will always be internal forces of reaction, and how will we treat them? Well, right back to this civil conflict. Civil conflict is how we deal with the forces of reaction. Hierarchical power structures try to arise, we destroy them. So, this is why I've often said anarchists are not against suppressing reaction. In fact, suppressing reaction, it's right here on the roadmap. There's no way to avoid it. It's just part of the process. Suppressing reaction is just what happens when horizontal power structures are winning over hierarchical power structures. But I hope that was a pretty good summary of the roadmap. There are a bunch of details I could have gotten into, giving people specific recommendations as to what they should do in any given one of those frames. However, I was hoping instead to just give an overview of what I am discussing in that flowchart. And I hope that flowchart is useful for you to be able to locate not only where you are in this process of revolution, but also where you need to be going if you're in the process of revolution. The flowchart itself kind of is recommendations about what you should be doing. Anyway, you can find this flowchart in the article version of A Modern Anarchism Part 3, which can be found on libcom. You can also find it being discussed in greater depth in A Modern Anarchism Part 3, titled Revolution. And if you want just a little more information on that one frame I laid out about autonomy just after the defeat of a hierarchical power structure, then you should go watch my video after the revolution. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that and found it informative. If you liked the video, go click like. If you disliked it, click dislike.
There we go. I think that's good for the end of that. Good. Yeah, I would like to see the flow chart in something that's uh, I don't. I'll find that later. Um, but yeah, I think having access to that flow chart would be kind of helpful for understanding the whole big project. It's on part 3. Part 3. Hey, there you go. Thank you. So is it? Don't tell me I scrolled past it already. Flow chart, right? So it's here somewhere. Hey, there we go. Gonna give me the. That's right. Because there was a few things that I wanted to really see. Because this is basically civil war, or some kind of actual engagement. Oh, you all can't see it all. Sorry. There, that's better. Right. So this is the flow from hierarchy into a mixed system, and then this is into a segregation, right? It's like 200 pages. Wow. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of stuff here. Yeah, this is actually pretty good, pretty comprehensive. I started to while we were watching the video, I started to think I was seeing holes or flaws in it, but they're all filled in. They all filled them in. That Anarch filled them all in before the end of the video. Um, the the thing that I first started to get wrong about the flow chart was that there was some kind of preset direction and some kind of preset path, but there's not. There are there are 3 different pathways ultimately, and all 3 of those pathways have different intersections that can lead to each other or lead back to previous sections, previous part. You can get to almost any of the nodes from almost any of the nodes, and that is kind of more realistic. what is a strange dead on the left hand side? Are you talking about this dead end right here? This is so if we find ourselves in a situation where horizontal powers are allowed to exist within the hierarchical system without much antagonism, then those flat structures can begin to work together, right, to form federations and to form larger power structures and larger federations, or what happens is rather than the rather than it being the hierarchy itself, which is pushing in against or fighting against the flat structures, what we have is, let's see if I can zoom in some, not really much. What we have is too much. A flat structure which is attacking or being antagonistic with another flat structure. And so with this, Anarch is talking about the possibility of leftist organizations working against each other. But we are also including the possibility that when you get your food feeding people organization going, and it starts to get a little bit of traction, there will be some other kind of non-profit or some other kind of horizontal structure that you are butting up against, and this other sees your movement as antagonistic to itself, and so will attack your movement, right, for any reason that that these structures become antagonistic. What it's gonna lead to is the recreation of hierarchies within the hierarchies, right? So this is just something that we see with a lot of the leftist movements that end up being like Democrats that start off as leftist movements that end up in electoral politics. That's what happens, right? Is that kind of thing. They begin in the right way, with the right movement, with the right ends in mind, but then they are countervailed by so many other forces that they end up becoming themselves hierarchical, adopting the same kind of hierarchical strategies that are not good for systems. It's mega mechanical recolonization, as Anarch calls it, right? That I knew that there was a really complicated name for what was going on here. Mega mechanical recolonization. But it's when our horizontal structures become hierarchical as a response to oh, you can't see my cursor. Why can you not see my cursor? I'm pointing to stuff on the screen and nobody can see it. There we go. It's because I resized the screen. It's okay. Oh yeah, everything is laid out here. Let me give a link to this. There you go. This will answer all the rest of your questions. There is no stable position in this map. Correct. The most stable position that we find is oscillating between these two. This is where hierarchy is dominant, and there are some horizontal power structures, and then we have the hierarchical system which oppresses and pushes against those other systems that are not hierarchical. And this is the back and forth where we, the proverbial everyone, spends most of their time, is back and forth between these, oscillating between these two circumstances. There's also a video essay series on the same name. Okay. The mega mechanical recolonization. Which seems pretty good. The theories that Anarch has laid out really seem quite well developed. I don't know how young Anarch is, but for somebody who looks as young as they are, they've got a well thought out, well developed system of theories that works well together. Oh, of modern anarchism. Okay. This also, this web is multidimensional in reality, many different map values depending on the angle one looks at the culture. Well, and one of the things that Anarch says right there at the end too, your position on the map might be unique, right? For where you are and your relative position relative to the powers. For every one individual and or for every organization, right, that we would try to put together and organize would be yeah. And the states are fuzzy. I think that it would be fair to say that it would be possible for one to find themselves in multiple states. Some of them are going to be mutually exclusive, but some of them won't necessarily be. So was Moses a libertarian socialist? After all, he built an ark. I mean, I guess that's true, huh? Huh. No, you're committing an anachronism. Yeah. That's another anarch. Good. Wow. Coming out with them puns hard. Story isn't linear, it's an arc. Absolutely. It's good stuff. Good. How to yeah, so we'll pick up this this other video. We'll watch the 6th video on Friday, I think. The reason why I'm saying I think is because it's possible I might want to do something else on Friday. But it's not very likely. Because I still have so much school stuff to do. Let me just take a minute. A last stream I was complaining about all of the AI stuff that I was having to do, that I have to spend a whole bunch of my time trying to tell whether people are cheating or not. So that's what I did all weekend. My essays, or the essays for my students, were for 2 of my classes. The essays were due on Friday. So all day Saturday and most of the day Sunday, the only thing that I did all day, both of those days, was try to determine whether my students were cheating. I didn't grade anything. I didn't do any real fucking work at all. I spent the whole time just trying to figure out if some of my students were cheating with using AI. So usually, this time of the semester, I get many of the essays graded that first weekend, last weekend, and I got 0 graded this semester. So during my fall break, instead of me enjoying a day off, I'm going to be grading essays today and tomorrow and the next day. Well, we use AI detection. Rather, let me be clear. One of my college institutions does not provide any kind of tools or resources for me to use to detect AI. So for that university, I really don't. There's not a lot that I can do. So if students at that university are using AI to cheat, that's the institution's problem. There's nothing I can do about it. And I hate to be so blasé about it, but fuck you, college. Do something. Do something about it. But my other university does. They provide, we use Turnitin. They have an AI detection tool that is not bad. So far as AI detection tools go, it's middling. But it's not foolproof. So one of the examples that I like to bring up is the very first semester that Turnitin used an AI detection software and gave a report to us. The very first paper that I checked with the AI checker had a big section of the essay that the AI checker said was written by AI. And that section that the AI checker said was written by AI was where the student had written word for word what I had put on a PowerPoint slide. My words. Right? So the AI detection tool is not 100%. For sure. So there's two problems with the AI detection software. People use AI that the AI detection software doesn't pick up on at all. Or you can use AI to generate the text, and then you can use an AI conditioning. It's a text conditioner to condition it. You condition it 4 or 5 times, and after you've conditioned it 4 or 5 times, it will fool almost any AI detection software. So there's that problem. Then there's also the problem of false positives, like where it was my words that the AI detection software thought was written by AI. And it happens an awful lot where I reach out to a student and I say, according to the AI detection software, 100% of your essay has been written by AI. And the student goes, that's impossible because of X, Y, and Z. And that can't be the case because I did this other thing to cheat. Right? And I have encountered a number of situations. In fact, this semester is actually a perfect example. I've got, I notified 6 students on Saturday that I reached out and I said, look, this is the case. You're getting a 0, and because the AI detection tool determined that you used AI. For 2 of the students that I contacted, I chose to do nothing. I didn't give them a 0. I didn't file an incident report. I didn't do anything because they had a good reason or a good enough excuse that I was like, okay, whatever. And two of the instances, I'm sure those students are guilty. I'm high confidence. In two of those situations, I'm not at all convinced that the students are guilty of anything, because even though the AI detection software has a high percentage and a high confidence rate, the words that they use and their the style of writing is not that unsimilar to their discussion board posts. And so, and that's what I spend my time doing, is when the AI detection software flags something, I have to pull up all of that student's discussion board posts and all of their responses to all of the other students' discussion board posts, and I comb through all of their language, and I look at the way that they use verbs, and I look at the way that they structure their sentences, and I look at their tone and phrasing, and then I have to compare that sentence by sentence by sentence to their fucking essay, and it takes me hours to comb through all of somebody's work for the entire fucking semester. But right now, that's what I have to do. Force the students to do video essays? Holy fuck, that is such a great idea. Wow. You might be on to something with that one. And be surrounded by lava lamps. That's good. Scan their brains. Yeah, just try to be practical here. AI creates ghosts under capitalism. Yeah, absolutely, Kayamatara. And that's there's an awful lot more that your ghost article. I'll spend some time on stream I'll go through the whole article at some point on stream. It's really good. But that's AI creates ghosts under capitalism. Absolutely. I would argue that all technology does. Literally all technology. And I don't know that this is categorically true for all of technologies over all of time. In fact, probably not. But all technology now, I believe is all forms of technology are are ghost creators. Tales of our former glory. Right, yeah. But this is something else too. I'm getting close to wrapping up the stream. We've been going for 3 hours. I thought it was just over 2 hours. We've been going over for 3 hours. So I'm gonna wrap the stream up soon. But a last thing that I would like to throw out and start something that I've been thinking about recently, that I might want to incorporate, right, more. Several years ago, somebody said something to me, that irritated me, and that I resented at the time. And so I had a hard time coming to terms with it in the way that I should have at the time that the person was talking to me about it. And what the person said was that I, personally, as an instructor, as a college instructor, am somewhat insulated. Well, it's something that they had said about themselves. They are a college instructor, and it's something that they said of themselves, that they are a college instructor, and because of their position as a college instructor, that they are largely insulated from many of the alienating aspects of capitalism. When I first heard this, it rubbed me the wrong way. I said, I'm the proletariat too. Don't tell me I'm alienated from the proletariat. I'm the proletariat too. But this is something that I've thought about an awful lot, and over the last several months, I'm coming to understand in a different way, in a more real way. I am alienated from the alienation. I am actually very protected and insulated from overall capitalist alienation. Economically, I get the privilege that that most people don't. Every year, the governor increases my rate of pay. And this is true for most government employees, and this is true for most college professors, is that they get paid a wage that does stay more competitive with the rest of the economy. Whereas most employees don't have that kind of protection. And that's a small one. That's a really small of the things, right? I have access to a wealth of knowledge and resources. If I reach out to my dean and say I'm struggling, my dean will do something to help me. If I can't pay rent, my dean will help me pay rent. If I can't put groceries on the table, my dean will help me put groceries on the table. Most people don't have access to those kinds of support networks that I just get. But one of the really, really, really big things that's starting to dawn on me, it's wild that this wasn't more obvious to me in the first place, is that my labor is largely mine in a way that almost nobody else in the workforce gets to enjoy. And let me be clear too, because there's the one university I work for where all of my decisions are made for me. So that one doesn't count. The other university that I work for is a very democratized workplace. Not only do I have direct control over my direct working conditions, but the indirect working conditions that are set by the college are things that I can potentially change too, because I can become a part of the Senate. There is a faculty senate, or I could appeal to the faculty senate, which is democratically run. I have a democratized workplace in a very real way, and I get to choose the substance of the content of my lectures. I get to choose the material. I get to choose how that's presented and how it's framed, and I get to set the terms of my labor. And I'm not alienated from it. So what's really got me on this is Kayamatara's article about this, the ghosts that are left behind by the remnants of our labor. That's not something that I experience. I get to enjoy the fruits of my labor because I get to have relationships with the students. I get to do the work and then see that work, right? At no point am I removed from the relationship of me and them and us coming together to form bonds, right? That's something that me and my students do. In ways that people who are making sneakers are not connected with the people who are buying the sneakers, right? The people who use the electricity are not connected with the people who make the electricity. I am intimately and deeply connected with the people with whom I labor, the students, which is another way that I am not alienated from the productivity from my labor. I get to do the work and then to see the fruits of all the work, which is there. It's a concept that should have been obvious to me a long time ago, but I'm still coming to terms with that idea that I am somewhat insulated from the alienation of the working class. Anyways, that's I thought that you all would find that interesting, and I expect that perspective is going to be coming up a lot more in our conversations going forward, especially when we start talking in much more about this idea of the specters of our labor, and other kinds of commodity fetishism. Yeah. Tell Dean I got a phone bill coming up in a couple of days. Right. Well, I've never used any of those kinds of services. When I first became an instructor, I probably could have. There were probably a lot of ways in which I could have been benefited by those programs, but because I have been, I've enjoyed a lot of success. Being an instructor, even though it pays terribly, right? My job does not pay well, by any stretch of the imagination, and that's another one of the reasons why it was a hard thing for me to come to terms with, because I get paid fucking peanuts. I get paid so poorly, right? I was working as an instructor for 4 years before I broke 20K, right? Like, come on, that's poverty, right? But I do enjoy a lot of relative privilege, and I'm coming to terms with that. Teachers unions are still necessary. Absolutely. Rolling in dried beans and rice. What a great conversation it's been today. What a great stream. But let's find somebody to raid out into. Oh, I need to click this button here. There's somebody I'm hoping is online and streaming right now that we can raid into. But they... Oh, there we go. Okay, good. The last time that we raided into a difficult truth, I was raiding you all into, like, I don't know what was going on. Carlos had something going on. And so I raided you all into a stream where they were just sitting there doing nothing. But they're not doing that today. A difficult truth is talking about news, and they're a good community of good people, good comrades. So let's go over and show some love to a difficult truth. Yeah. The greater treasure is to be able to appreciate your labor, and that's the thing, right? And that's an advantage, a privilege that in the hopelessness that is our world, right? I get to do something that isn't always hopeless, right? I get to do things where I'm doing direct action with people and making those people's lives better. Right. So, anyways, I'm so lucky is all. I'm so privileged. Anyways, I appreciate you all. Trashnomancer, Matt, Jane, you're all amazing. DJ Che, thank Kaya Matara. Thank you for for everything. Until the next time I see you all, be excellent to each other. I think I got it in there.